We turn now to a much debated subject, religion, and the belief or not in God. Many have fallen prey to Christopher Hitchens' criticisms over the years, most notoriously Mother Teresa and Bill Clinton, and now it's God's turn. In his new book, God is Not Great, God is not great in this book. The case against religion, he argues that religion, among other things, is violent, irrational, intolerant, and allied to racism too. And the book is now #1 in the New York Times and in at least 3 other countries around the world as well. Congratulations on the success of the book. Welcome.
Thank you.
Are you surprised, Christopher, that particularly in a country that is as famously religious as America, that the book is doing this well?
Well, no, because I think it's partly for that reason. There are a lot of people in America who are alarmed at the presumption, really, that religious people make. They don't like hearing the president say, God bless America, amid the collapsing scenery of his administration. They don't like being told that stem cell research is not for them because it seems to conflict with some people's concept of piety. They don't like the idea that their children should be stultified in school by being taught creationist nonsense that would put them further behind in a very competitive economy and society. And they don't like American money being used for messianic settlements on the West Bank.
At the same time, as far as we can tell, looking at these opinion polls that are pretty recent, 2006 here, and they all come out saying 82% of those surveyed believe in God. This one, yeah. 82, this one, 94.
I'm almost certain, well, in fact, I think I am certain now, David, that the people lie to the opinion polls, especially about religion. People don't want to say they're atheists. They also claim to go to church, much more than they really do. That's a finding. There aren't enough churches in America to hold the people who say they go to them. But the polls then print this, and it becomes a feedback loop. So it becomes more and more likely people won't want to identify with some freakishly small atheist minority. But the Pew Forum, which is a very respected polling group and social research group, has found that the fastest growing group in the United States is unbeliever.
Is the unbeliever?
There are now more of us than there are Jews or Muslims.
And what about, though, looking at this election, this upcoming election?
Yes.
It looks as though the Christian vote is going to be sought after just as much as ever. You know, the Democrats are going for the Christian vote now, aren't they, as well as the Republicans?
They are, and there are 3 candidates in the Republican field who, when asked, say that they do not believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. However, there's a problem for the Christian voters this time, in that a very likely Republican nominee, Mitt Romney, is a Mormon who is particularly disliked by Southern Protestant evangelicals who regard Mormonism as a heresy. So you see there again one of the great problems of allowing religion into politics is you allow fights not between believers and unbelievers, but between believers. As it were a Protestant Catholic split or a Baptist Jewish one. Now there's a Mormon evangelical split.
Do you think it would be more difficult to get elected in America as a card-carrying atheist, as opposed to being a card-carrying black or a card-carrying woman?
Yes, I think it probably would be slightly, but we haven't had a real test of the proposition yet. I mean, if in 1972, say, you'd asked a moderate Republican person, would you consider voting for a divorced, second-rate Hollywood actor as president? Probably the answer is no. But they haven't met that person yet. They're only talking about a description. Now, if a person of real integrity, and good grasp of the issues, and some personal charm and courage, got into politics and in the presidential debate said, I must tell you, I'm not a man of any faith. I'm unsupported, I'm unconsoled by any religion. I think they could do it, yes. Hope so, because otherwise we'd have had to skip Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Lincoln, and I don't think anyone would want to be without those 2 presidents.
Today, of course, you remain constant too, Christopher, in your support for the Iraq War. Not necessarily the Bush regime, but the Iraq War.
Well, I'm for one side in the war. I'm against the parties of God, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, this is the flag of Kurdistan that I wear in my lapel. I'm a very strong partisan of the autonomy of the Kurdish people in Iraq and their allies, generally the secular Democrats, who are in a life and death struggle now in Iraq. I think one has to be on their side, yes.
Yeah. And but you you've stayed with that, because a number of people who supported the war before have become very, very much strident critics now.
Well, yes, and because of the unpardonable mismanagement of the affair and the terrible bungling, and I think also a sort of despair among some people at the terrible, maimed, traumatized character of Iraqi society after 25 years of fascism and war, the lack of any social solidarity, the willingness of people to turn on one another in this way has been a very cruel disillusionment for many.
Well, thank you very much for being with us.
It's an honor.
I know you've been on a fantastic tour for the book, and I hope you have a good rest.
Thank you, sir. Thanks
Christopher Hitchens. After 2 decades in the US Air Force, Karen Kotowski knew her career at the Pentagon was coming to an end when, in the months leading up to the invasion of Iraq, she started to question the US motives for war and the intelligence that was being put out by the government. Now a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, Karen Kotowski is one of the war's strongest critics and writes extensively on her time at the Pentagon. Karen, welcome. What was it that really got to you? Was it the groupthink or what that got to you in the Pentagon and made you feel you had to move on?
Well, groupthink is, I think, part of any big organization. So groupthink is part of it. But really what offended me was the workings of the Office of Special Plans, the talking points that they were producing, that we were mandated to use inside the Pentagon, did not match the intelligence that we normally would go to find out what's going on in the region. The Office of Special Plans, formed in the summer of 2002, began to put out for internal use and apparently external use as well, basically phraseology, language, statements, which, while drawn from intelligence, actually varied a great deal from the truth. And we were being given this and told and mandated to use it. I heard the president give speeches which reflected that very same false information in the fall of 2002, and that offended me a great deal. The groupthink I could live with. The corruption and lying, I think, was the big problem.
Do you think that President Bush was actually a victim of this process, or had he mandated it, or was he literally being misled as well?
You know, that's hard to say. I know at the time I felt that George Bush probably was being victimized by an agenda being put forth, particularly by Dick Cheney, the Scooter Libby crowd, and the neoconservatives in the Pentagon and elsewhere in Washington. I felt that initially George Bush had to be, I mean, he's the president, you know, he certainly wouldn't do these kinds of things. He wouldn't, corrupt the process like this at the very top. But in the years that have followed, I think that he was not a victim. I think certainly that he wanted this to happen. He certainly participated in giving these speeches, repeating lies multiple times, both before and after the invasion of Iraq, consciously doing so. And he has the command of any information that he wants to get, and he chose to lie. So I don't believe that he was a victim. I think he was a part of it. I don't see him necessarily as the mastermind. I think Dick Cheney deserves a lot more credit in that regard.
But what about the situation today in Iraq? I mean, do you think there's any hope of a happy ending, or do you indeed think that it would have been better if we'd never been and that Saddam Hussein was still running Iraq?
Well, I can tell you this, in my mind, had we never gone into Iraq and had those sanctions been lifted, which they were pretty much due to be lifted about the same time we invaded, the sanctions would no longer hold, Iraq would be an industrious country, as it had been once before, and Saddam Hussein would have probably been assassinated by his own people or otherwise taken out. We were not patient. We did not trust the Iraqi people to take care of their problems. We invaded. There's no happy ending as long as U.S. military troops are in Iraq. We are there, I think, unjustly. We are a big part of the problem of violence in that country. I think we have to bring the troops home, and that includes all the troops, in my mind. I think a lot of the people in Congress are talking about we should bring the troops home, but we're going to keep some behind in those military bases we constructed, those permanent bases. And I don't think you will have a happy solution ever as long as there are unwanted American troops in Iraq.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen, for joining us.
Okay.
And that's about it for this week, with our thanks to Karen and all of my other guests today, from John Major right through the show. Next week sees the 10th anniversary of the Hong Kong handover, and I'll be joined by the last governor, that's a capital L, a capital G, Chris Patton. Hope you can join me then.